Okay guys, we are now coming to the end of the introduction to barbering course. We only have 3 more videos left to make, and today's video is going to be the beginner tutorial for skin fading. So it's a step-by-step tutorial for beginners just to learn the whole principles of a skin fade and how it works. I hope it makes sense. We're going to just break it down, explain the visual aspects of a fade and how you then connect the guards to create that fade, before then moving on to talk about cutting the top, which will be the 5 roads method, and then we'll just be doing a little bit of blending and styling to finish, and that will be the end of the introduction to barbering course. Then you guys should be ready to move on to the barber development course. But what I will say is, just because you might have completed the video and applied it to the mannequin head or to one of your friends or family, if you have any members brave enough, just because you completed it, it doesn't mean that you're ready to move on. What I would say is, really double check your work, really make sure you're happy with it. Be a perfectionist. If you don't feel like you're there quite with the methods or the techniques, if you still feel like there's a lot of learning to do, then go back, watch the video again and practice again. Practice and practice and practice until it feels natural. Once it feels natural, then you're ready to progress. Don't try progressing when you're still struggling following the tutorials that we've created so far. Go through all the videos, step by step, follow them, and then reapply those techniques again and again until you're happy with the process and the method and it feels easy to you. Once it feels easy, then you are ready to move on. So with the skin fading demonstration today, on a doll's head, it's not that accurate, but the zones, the layout and the guards are. So I'm hoping you'll get the gist of how it works on the mannequin head, but when you actually go to apply it on a live model, it might be a little bit harder, but that's fine. Just practice. Practice makes perfect, and don't panic too much about making a mess on a skin fade. Though you're cutting hair really short, hair does grow back really quick, and a skin fade, if there's any lines or any patches that you've made by accident on someone's head, in 3 to 5 days they'll have grown back and you're not going to notice them. So it's not the end of the world if you make a mistake, especially if you're practicing on a live model. But practice it on the doll's head first, practice it all one side, and then practice it again on the opposite side. So you get a chance of doing it twice on one doll's head, if that makes sense. Then we'll be going on to the cutting on the top, then the blending, and once you're comfortable doing those things on a mannequin head, then you're ready to move on. So sorry for repeating myself, but I just want you to make sure that you are happy with your methods, that you really made an effort, you've watched the videos 2 or 3 times until it makes sense to you, and until the methods feel easy to you, for you, then you can progress. So let's move on to the skin fading. Okay guys, skin fading for beginners, easy peasy. Now a skin fade is made up of 3 zones. You got your blend zone, fade zone and skin zone. So if you put your hand, 3 fingers of your hand just above the ear, where they stop is roughly the top of the blend zone. But if you want to make sure, you can put your comb flat against the doll's head, put your finger down the roundness of the head until it stops on the comb. Where that stops is where the recession point of the head starts. So what the recession point means is where it starts to recess, where it starts to round. Okay, and we don't want to be following that round, because then it'll round the overall shape of the head. We want to be coming away square at that point. So we have to be visual and careful to know where that is, to then lift the clip away as we're working on the blend zone. But we'll explain the blend zone shortly. Alright, but just give you a rough idea how high we're working towards. If you put your fingers there, that top finger, depending obviously how fat your fingers are, but roughly your 3 fingers will make up your 3 zones in that department. But if you're not sure, just to double check, comb against the head, put your finger in until it stops, and that's where your recession point is. That's where the clipper, the highest guard of the clipper, needs to stop. So basically, where that recession point is, you can't go any higher with the clipper on the head. At that point, you need to be bringing the clipper away from the head to start to create a square blend, rather than following the head round and exposing its shape. Alright, so 3 zones again. I'm going to repeat myself now just to make sure. 3 zones. Blend zone, fade zone, skin zone. Now in each zone there's 2 steps. In the blend zone, you're made up of 2 guards. Your 1 guard and your 2 guard, and then some lever adjustment in between. Your middle zone, your fade zone, is made up of your zeros and your halves with some lever work. And the lever work is on the clipper where you can push the lever down or up to open or close the clipper, which slightly adjusts the length that you're cutting. And then your skin zone, the bottom finger there, that's where we literally just take it down to skin. So there you work with your trimmer and your foils. Now on a mannequin head, I do not want you to be using a foil against the head, it'll just ruin the blades of the foil. So on our skin zone, we will just be using the detailer or the trimmers to connect it to the fade zone. Okay, so let's go through that again. Blend zone is made up of your 2 guards and your 1 guard. So top of the blend zone would be a 2 guard and the bottom of your blend zone would be the 1 guard, with a bit of lever work in between to connect to blend. Your fade zone is made up of your zeros and your half guards, all right? And then your bottom is your trimmer and your foils, or your shortest cutting blades, but it's going to be a trimmer on this demonstration. And all a fade is just gradually building it up from shorter to longer until it blends. Some people will refer to 1 fades or half fades. It's exactly the same. Whatever they're asking for is the shortest point, and then that then gradually gets longer until it blends. So if you had like a 1 fade or a half fade, like you've seen on the other demonstrations, that would be the lowest part of the haircut, and then you would blend it up then through the grades until it blends, and up until a 2, and then you'd be able to work through the hair, then scissor of a comb, clipper of a comb, or with a 4 guard if you'd rather keep using the clipper work. So I'm just going to repeat that one more time. Blend zone, 2 and a 1. Fade zone, 0.5 and 0. And then your skin zone, trimmer and foils. Okay, now I'll be setting the zones in so you can see the colour contrast, and then what I'll be doing is I'll be then using the guards in between to push the lines out. Alright, so concentrate, focus, 3 zones, 2 steps per zone, so that's 6 steps in a skin fade. But in between there might be some lever work, opening and closing the lever, just to slightly adjust the lengths to help then all the grades blend together. Okay? For the skin fade tutorial, we want to remove the hair on top from the sides. So I'm just going to take a wide tooth comb through the bulk of the top, and then once the long parts of the hair above the recession line grip, I will then put a clip in to section that away from the sides. Once we have the hair on the sides, and then we can focus on the skin fade. And the whole idea of this is that we don't accidentally want to cut the hair on top in this part of the head. We want to be protecting the top from the sides, and we can focus on blending it in afterwards. Alright, what we don't do is accidentally comb hair from the top into the fade. We cut it with a clipper, and then when we go and try and style or cut the top, there's bits of hair that's too short because we've cut it too low down. So let's separate the hair on top away, and then expose the hair on the side so we can cut the fade in clearly and easily without getting in trouble with the hair on top. So we are going to be starting our blend zone with the 2 guard. Now if you've watched the previous videos, the last video, the 1 fade and the half fade, the 2 back and sides and the general clipper work, you'd have a good idea on how to set that blend zone, how to remove the bulk on the side, and how to set that shape. But just for the purpose of a skin fade, we'll go through it again. So that's a 2 guard, lever down to make it a 2.5, lever up so it's closed, and that's a 2. This is actually a senior, so a lever all the way down is actually a little bit longer than 2.5. It's probably about 2.75, but just as a rule of thumb, down is longer, up is shorter, and everything in between then you can just adjust as you need to. So it's always safer to start with it open, because then we're removing less hair, which is safer. As we're cutting, if we find that then we can go a bit shorter, we can gradually just lift the lever, making the blade shorter. Okay, so let's open it up first. 2 guard on, and we're going to just remove the bulk to protect the shape of the blend. And that is the top grade in our blend zone. So remember, 2 steps per zone, 3 zones in total. We're going to start on the blend zone rather than lower down, because it's important that that blend zone then protects the hair on top. We don't want to start with a fade zone, accidentally go too high, and then we have no room to blend. Alright, the blend is more important than the fade, because this part will control how the hair grows out, how easy it is to style, and how good it looks on the customer's head. If we compromise the blend zone, then it's ruined the whole haircut. Okay, so we've got to be careful that we keep the right shape in that blend zone to then control the overall shape of the haircut and how well it grows out. Once that's in position, you know then that you have to work your other zones below that. So blend zone first, remove the bulk, set the shape, then we can set our line for the fade zone, then we can set our line for the skin zone, and then we can just connect then both zones to complete the fade. So 2 guard, which is the highest guard in the blend zone, to set the shape. Okay, so some tips here for you. Look at the direction of the hair, where it's sitting and what direction it's sitting in. Because if you can cut against the direction of hair growth, so for example, if the hair is growing this way, if you can cut then directly against it, it'll cut cleaner. If your hair is coming in this direction and you're coming in that direction, you're pushing some hair away and you're not cutting it all cleanly. So let's have a look at going against the direction of hair growth. So we're cutting it nice and clean. We want to be going in with the teeth of the guard, working onto the body of the guard, and then lifting away, focusing on where the blade is, and we want to be lifting that blade away just below the recession point. Just so don't forget, the recession point is where the head starts to round. Okay, so we need to find that on the head. That's where it starts to round. So we need to be making sure that our blade comes away just before that bit to then protect the shape and to cut in the shape that we need for that style without exposing the shape of the head, keeping it square and masculine as much as possible. Can you see the shape we've created? We haven't followed the shape of the head. We haven't rounded the blend. We've kept it straight. We followed that shape of that comb all the way up, creating a square profile, as you can see that edge, rather than a round profile. Okay, and this then will frame the hair on top much more effectively and will give an overall better look to the hairstyle. We don't need to be starting with a 2 guard right the way down at the baseline, because we will be working into that section with shorter guards. So the 2 guard, you can just start in the middle of the head, teeth in, onto the body, and then lift away to carve in that square shape. Once you're happy and comfortable with the cutting and the method, you can then close the lever, taking it right down to a 2, just to clean away underneath to make sure it's nice and sharp. So now that blend zone is in position, we can now set the fade zone, the top guard of the fade zone, which is a half, and we need to set that in centrally and keeping it parallel from the baseline to the blend zone. So remember now the 3 steps: blend zone, fade zone, skin zone. 2 and 1, half and 0, trimmer and foil. So if we put a 2 in there, the half in there and the trimmer in there, that is the top grade of each zone. Alright, so the bottom grade of a blend zone will be a 1, the bottom grade of the fade zone will be a 0, and the bottom grade of the skin zone will be a foil on the skin fade. Okay, so if the top of that grade is a 2, then the top of this grade is a half, then the top of this then would be a trimmer. And that's how we're going to put our steps in to give the overall layout of the skin fade, before then taking the lines out with the grades in between, the bottom grades of each zone. So just to clarify, we've put the 2 in there on the blend zone. We'll now be putting a 0.5 in on the fade zone. Okay, now some people would class this open as 0.5. You could just go in and set your fade line with that straight away, but for a beginner, that blade will cut it so sharp and so flat that it will be hard to get that line out. for beginners, I would always recommend putting the half guard on. That way you also know that when the lever's all the way up, it is half, because obviously with seniors and magics, depending on where you've pushed the lever, it's hard to say exactly what grade we're cutting at. So if we put the half guard on and close the lever, we know then it is a half and not a 0.75, for instance. And because the blade is round and not flat like the exposed blade, it will leave a nicer edge, making it easier then to blend out. Okay, so there's two starting points on a fade. So we've got above the temple for a high fade, or we've got below the temple point then for a medium to low fade. Now, I personally would say that you only really get high fades or medium fades. If you wanted a low fade, you wouldn't then use the skin zone. Maybe slightly here and at the back, but you wouldn't put a skin zone in above the ear, because then you'd have to push the whole fade really high. So if someone wants a skin fade, you're asking them, do you want a high skin fade or do you want a medium skin fade? Or a low skin fade, you could ask them, and to give them the illusion that it's going to be lower. Because guarantee if you try to go in too low on a skin fade, they'll ask you to take it higher. That's just how it is in a barbershop. So a high skin fade, you start your fade zone above the temple, and on a lower skin fade, you start your fade zone below the temple. But as they come back, those two zones, they meet in the same place after the ear, and then they follow to the same place at the back. The only part is different is at the front. And that gives the illusion then of a higher fade or a lower fade based on where you start here, because that's the point that the customer sees. We don't want to be taking the fade too high at the back, because then you're going to compromise the shape towards the back of the head. So after you come past the ear, you then connect. So if it's a higher fade, you'd stop there. Same with a lower fade, you'd stop at the same point, and then you would drop it down at the back. If someone wants a really low skin fade, then you wouldn't put a skin zone in. So your fade zone then would drop there to where it would be on a low skin fade, but you wouldn't then go in with the trimmer and the foils. You'd keep that bit as a 0. You could maybe just trimmer and foil the nape, just so that feels a little bit cleaner for the customer. All right, but it's just once someone starts asking for low fades and you put in a skin zone in there, then a fade zone in there, and you blend zone in here, that's basically a medium fade. All right, so I don't overcomplicate it. I'm sorry I've given you a little bit too much information. At the end of the day, this is a beginner skin fade tutorial. But as a general rule, ask the customer a higher fade or a medium fade, and once they've chosen, above the temple starting point for a high, below the temple for a low or a medium. All right, guys? And if they say, no, I want a low fade, just remember, then we don't put the skin zone in. We'll just drop the fade zone a little bit lower, and then we can just clean down the bottom with a 0. Okay, so fade zone now, lever up, so we know it's definitely a half. We're going to be starting just above the temple point on this one, so we can be doing a higher fade in this demonstration. I can always do a medium fade on the other side if you want to see the difference. And then we're going to be coming centrally between the ear and the blend zone. We want to be keeping that nice and balanced and parallel in between. We don't want to take it too high, and we don't want to drop too soon. We want to keep that consistently central until we can pass the ear, then we can drop it down at the back. And remember now, with the teeth in, moving on to the body of the blade, which is that bit, and rolling out. So we're creating a tapered shape, going from shorter to longer. That will make it easier for us to blend. Okay, we don't need to start from the bottom, because that shows us then where our skin zone is. So it shows us where we need to clear with our trimmer. If we take it all away, then it's hard sometimes to see how high we need to be going with our skin zone, and we could accidentally go too high into the fade zone, which means you'd have to push that zone up. The whole point of a skin fade working is connecting each grade to each other evenly throughout the cut to allow that contrast of colour then from light to dark. And that's what a skin fade is. It's a build-up of colour from light greens to medium grains to dark grains, and that's where it looks like a fade. And working up through the steps of each guard will give you just a different shade of hair, which will then give you that overall fade effect. So with that fade zone, okay, it's important to focus on the angle of the blade. So the angle of the blade will determine the shape of the fade. If we go to start the blade, say like that, and we go to cut, then that top bit is going to take that too high. So we've got to be conscious of the angle of the blade when cutting. Okay, so there I've tilted the right hand side down a bit, and I've started working through controlling the shape of that fade zone. So that's the 2 guard, that's the half guard, and now we can go in with a trimmer to set the top grade of the skin zone. Okay, so because we didn't come down too low with that fade zone, we can see that shadow of hair that needs to be removed. We want to aim to stop that trimmer just on that section of hair. So it goes to show really that when you put your 3 fingers there, just to show the overall shape of the zones, so each finger is basically the depth that you need to be creating with the top guards. So with that half guard, basically the zone that I've created there is roughly the thickness of my finger. So I've started with the teeth at that point, and I've rolled out onto the body to create that shape, which is roughly ½ an inch, say, and then I've dropped it down further back. So ½ an inch of 0.5 to create that fade zone, and then we've got plenty of room beneath then to add that skin zone. So I'm going to go in now with my trimmer. I'm going to start from the bottom, I'm going to work up to the bottom half of that fade zone, and I'm going to flick away the hair to create my skin zone. Now, with this being a mannequin head, it's not that easy to see that fade zone, but you can just about see it. So where I stopped with my trimmer has created a faint line because that grade's only a half. So the grade in between a trimmer and a half is a 0. So technically the trimmer would class as, say, a -1. If you're thinking of it in terms of temperature, when it gets below 0, it gets colder, or in this case, it gets shorter. So below 0 here, it gets shorter, so that's a -1. And then lower down then where your foils come in, that would be a -2. I think the American grading terms are 000, 000, 0. And then as we work up, then we've got 0.5, 1, 1.5 and 2. But that 1.5 is just where you work that lever on the 1 guard just to blend it into the 2. But hopefully there now you can see the zones. Your skin zone, fade zone and blend zone. So that's your 3 zones. And now we've got steps in between now to connect those zones. So on the live model you'd use a foil just throughout the lower part of that skin zone. But on a mannequin head we're not going to be doing it because it could damage your tool. Because this isn't, it's plastic at the end of the day, it's not skin. And you're not even going to be able to see it. Alright, so just the focus today is going to be on using the trimmer as the shortest grade, okay? But we've got the zones in place now, so if that's a 2, then that line needs to come out with a 1. And if that's a trimmer, then that line needs to come out with a 0. Now there might be some lever work needed in between. So we're going to do the 0 line first, then we're going to go into the top of the fade zone with an open one and then closed one to try and fade that out. And if there's any weight or darkness left in between that blend zone and fade zone, we can always put the 0.5 guard back on and then open the lever, because don't forget we've created that zone with the lever closed. So we can always go back and then with that lever open, so it's more like a 0.75. Fully open then would be a 1, but obviously the shape of the guard's a little bit smaller than a 1 guard, allowing you to get a little bit closer to flick out any dark spots. Okay, but first thing now we're going to work back up. So we've worked down blend zone, fade zone, skin zone. We would foil there on a live model, and now we're going to work back up then the bottom half of the fade zone and the bottom half of the blend zone, which will be a 0 and then a 1. Okay. So now that we're going to be fading the lines out, you want to be holding a fade brush. So the short, stiffer bristles on this will make it easier to clear away shorter hair, cleaning the canvas of the head, allowing you to see what you're doing a lot more easily. Alright, so we know now that's the trimmer, we know that that's the half, so we're going to work in between with a 0. But as a rule of thumb, just to make sure we don't take it too short and too high, let's always open the lever slightly first and start to flick that line out. And if it doesn't come out, then we can start closing the lever to a 0 to start to blend that in. But it's better to start with the lever slightly open first. That would also blend in then like a 0.25 into the 0.5 and then closing it to a 0 to get the line out. Rather than attacking the line with a 0 and potentially taking that so high that we've got to then push the whole fade zone up. Okay, so let's always start with a bigger guard working down. So 0, half open to probably to a 0.3 or a 0.4. And we're going to just concentrate on just blending that line out. We're going to start below the line with the teeth down, and we're just going to work through the line and flick out to start to blend it. Now we've got to be careful, especially with using exposed blades on a client's head. We don't want to be digging into them. We don't want to be putting too much pressure on it. We just want to be, on them I should say, not it. We just want to be below that line and gently working through, flicking the line out. Leave the clipper do the work. You don't need loads of pressure. I don't care how big and strong you are. The clipper does all the work, you just guide it and control the angles. Alright, so let's connect the skin zone and the fade zone. See how careful I was then not to go all the way up to the top of the fade zone, because if I was to push that 0.3 or 0.4 up to there, then we compromise the actual fade zone itself, because that's meant to be a half. So I just had it flicking through that line with a slightly open 0. Now I'm going to close it to get the rest of that line out before moving on to the blend zone. So did you see there that I was using the corner a lot? I wasn't focusing on going too firm with the blade, using the full blade, because I could easily accidentally push sections too high into the fade zone. I kept the angle of the blade the same angle as the line, and I focus on using the corner a lot, because that means that I'm cutting with a much smaller surface area and there's less chance that I'm going to push lines too high or take a chunk out of the hair. So I'm just going to be precise with my fading method and just target that line gently, using precision and focus to get it out without trying too hard and accidentally then compromising the fade. So the skin zone is now connected to the fade zone. We now just have to connect the blend zone to the fade zone. Now we have to be careful here not to compromise that blend zone. We don't want to start pushing that one guard so high and so tight to the scalp that we've fully disconnected it and compromised the shape. We've got to look to maintain that shape. So when we're working with that one zone, we've got to be coming, with the one guard, sorry, in the bottom half of the blend zone, we need to be coming out to connect to the two guard and not keep it down and accidentally go through the two guard. So we're coming out to the end of the two guard, not through the two guard, okay? Out, not through, okay? So just like that fade zone, let's open it slightly first. So we're not taking off as much hair. It'll make it easier for us to blend it into the two if this is only a 1.5. If we go into the 1 first, we could easily take too much hair away and then compromise the shape. So let's open it up. If you want to be extra careful, open it all the way to a 1.75. Start below the line, keep the teeth slightly pointed towards the head as you come through that line, and then lift away to connect to the top half of the blend zone, which is a 2. So here we're not focused on cutting hair off, we're focused on cutting hair into shape. We don't look at what we're cutting away, we look at what we're leaving behind, okay? Because the hair we leave behind is what controls and affects the style and the regrowth. What you cut away is gone, that's then irrelevant now, that's discontinued, game over. So let's not focus too much on taking hair off, let's focus on cutting hair into shape and getting the hair that we've left behind sitting in the correct position, alright? So lever fully down, 1.75 guard through the line. As you come in through the line with a blade, not the teeth lift the hair out, but you should be watching that blade because that's what does the cutting, okay, that metal bit in there. As you watch that come through the hair, start to lift it away and connecting it to the 2. Okay. Changing the angle for method purposes. So can you see that little bit of a weighted ridge? That's what we need to be working through and then connect it into the 2, which is in this department. Okay, so watch the method again. Here's the line. I'll turn the head slightly just so you can see the line. Here's the line. I'm starting just below the line, working into it and out then to carve the correct shape in. See that shape coming together? How it's now connecting to the 2 guard, but we've taken it tighter towards that fade zone. You can see a little ridge that's left, but don't forget we've just done all that with a 1.75, with a 1 guard lever all the way down. We can now start closing that lever and target that line until it all fully blends and fades. So we're now ready to fully close the 1 guard to get the rest of that line out. And if there's any dark spots left at the end, we can just put the 0.5 fade guard back on, open the lever and just polish out those dark spots. So can you see I'm not going as high as I did in the first 2 lever adjustments. When it was fully open, I was coming through and connecting it to the 2 guard. As I've started to close it, I've kept that lift end a lot shorter, and now that I'm just getting the rest of that line out, I am only targeting that line with precision. I'm not flicking all the way through into the 2. So coming down the grades has created that layer that I need from 2, 1.75, 1.5, 1 until it connects to the half. And just like where we connected the skin zone to the fade zone, the process is the same. So there's certain parts here, if we see that there's darker spots and we're scared of pushing the fade too high, we can just use that corner to refine it rather than using the whole blade and accidentally put a new line in. So as you can see, that 1 was basically enough to get that whole line out between the blend zone and the fade zone. We've still maintained the shape. We've kept a nice, square, clean, structured layer from the fade zone through the blend zone, keeping a nice frame there to hold the hair on top. And there'll be another demonstration later on in the introduction of barbering course that shows then how we can blend that in, connecting the fade to the top. But just to be OCD, I will now be using a 0.5 guard with the lever open just to refine some dark spots, to give us a nice, clean, blurry, faded haircut. And there's your skin fade. Trimmer, 0, half, 1, 2. 3 zones. Blend zone, fade zone, skin zone. 6 steps in total, 3 zones with 2 steps per zone. None of it involved hard pressure, rough clipper work. It was just gently precision work, allowing the tool to do all the work. All you have to focus on is the shape of the zones, the direction of the hair, and the height of the flick of the method. So as you work in with a lever down, we can work a little bit higher. Then as we're working towards the line, we start to close the lever, we don't lift as high. And it's as simple as that, really. So that's your skin fade going through the steps. All I'll show this side now is maybe a lower, a lower fade, so that you can see then maybe where the position would be different and it would be more arched over the ear, but the process of the cut is exactly the same. So you can see here, we want to be protecting that square layer. It's already cut into shape because we did that on the clipper work demonstration with the 1 fade in into the 2. So that's already in place. But for the purpose of a skin fade, we are now going to show how to do a lower skin fade. And some would even call it a drop fade, where we just drop the fade zone below the temple, but we lift it up to the same position centrally throughout the skin fade and then drop it down throughout the back. And the only difference is the starting point. How we connect them and everything else is exactly the same. So this is going to be a real-time demonstration. You've seen the steps broken down in the last part of the skin fade. On this side now, I'm just going to work through the grades as I would in a live model, so you can see how the methods will be applied with confidence once you're more experienced. Okay, so blend zone, 2 guard. Leave it down slightly first to remove the bulk and set the shape. Now we're dropping the fade zones. On the last side, we started above the temple. This side, we're going to start below the temple. So this will be classed as a drop fade or a medium fade. We're going to lift it then to the central point and drop it down at the back. Lever closed, because we know with the guard on there, it is actually a half. Also look at the angle of that blade. I'm making sure I'm started with the corner pointed down to control that dropped effect, the down effect. If I was to start like this, then the top part of that fade could easily catch the hair higher up, and then we've compromised the whole fade. So be conscious of the angle of the clipper to control the angle of the fade. let's clear the skin zone. So the skin zone still has to follow the same shape as that fade zone. So depending on the fade they want, you then have to keep the zone below parallel to the shape of the fade. So being a drop fade or a lower fade, we've brought that fade zone down, so we've also brought the skin zone down. But as you go past the ear, everything else opens up exactly the same. So the zones are now in place. Blend zone, fade zone, skin zone. Let's connect the lines. Again, with it being a mannequin head, it's not very easy to see the zones, but once you practice the methods and you've got a good idea of the layout and the depth and how high to go with your zones, there's plenty of other videos on the barber development section for skin fading. So now we're going to connect that skin zone to the fade zone with the lever slightly open and then closed to get that line out. Skin zone is now connected. We are now ready to use the one grade, open, slowly closing it to connect the fade zone and the blend zone. So you can still see the shape we've created. We've maintained that square profile. We've connected the fade zone to the blend zone, but I'm just going to put the 0.5 guard back on and just use the corner just to refine any dark spots left in the fade. So you can see then below that temple how that initial fade zone is lower, then it raises as it goes back. You can see here now where the starting point is lower, but I've raised it to meet at the central point of the fade on the side of the head. Now barbers would argue that a drop fade and a medium fade are two different fades, but for the sake of practicing on a doll's head, there's only really two places you can go. Because the temple points are not accurate and the actual shape of the side of the head isn't accurate, there's not much more I can show you really. So if you're cutting a live model or a friend asks you for a drop fade, then if you set a medium fade in just below the temple, then you're going to be safe. I don't want to overcomplicate things for you, so just for now, just focus on two different heights. You get the higher fade just above the temple, but you've got to be conscious on different models, the temples are in different positions. So if you've already got a high temple, don't go starting all the way up here, then you need to come to the corner of the eyebrow as a guideline. The only problem with the mannequin head is these points are different, that's the only thing. But as a general rule, temple point or above for a higher fade, and below that into the concave where it arches in for a lower or medium fade. So above the temple point for a higher fade, sorry, below the temple point for a medium fade. And if someone asks for a drop fade, just give them a medium fade, especially when you're starting out. Later on, when you're more experienced and you've mastered the methods, then yeah, you can become a lot more creative with your fading and try different heights and depths and drops and that sort of thing. But for now, for learning purposes, two fades, higher and lower fade, temple or above, and then below for a lower fade. But you can see then the difference. It does look like there's a little bit of a line there. With it being a mannequin head, you're never going to get it perfect. But what's important is the shape. It's about maintaining that square profile. Alright? That's the same this side, keeping that square profile, and that then gives us depth to hold the hair on top. So when we release that hair on top, it's going to sit into that blend zone. Let's get a comb. So now that we've kept depth in those blend zones, we've created a frame then to hold the hair on top. If we were taking that too tight to the head, we then would have created a disconnection, giving us that ice gem effect where it's flat and then it sticks out, you know. Because we've built it up and created a nice square masculine profile, we've created a foundation then to rest the hair on top into. All we need to do next then, after we've cut the hair on top, is just to blend it in on the sides. So that's the skin fade for beginners. 3 zones: blend zone, fade zone, skin zone. Put the highest grade of each zone in first. So in a blend zone it's a 2, in a fade zone it's a half, and in the skin zone it's a trimmer, and then we just connect them then with the shorter grades of each zone, and that's with a 0 and then with a 1. And just remember, we just need to be working the lever slightly open first and then closing it to create that nice layered transition from longer to shorter as we work throughout the fade. Okay guys, so the bit we didn't show you on camera because we really wanted to focus in on the side profile, because that's the hardest part to work with because it's the shortest. We've got a lot less room to work with there, but as we get to the back, there's much more room and easier to blend it all in. So what we did was, I know I'd done the fade on 2 opposite sides, but that's exactly how I skin fade in the barber shop. I don't do sort of a blend zone all the way around and then the fade zone all the way around. I personally do all the fade one side, and then I come to the opposite side and do all the fade, and then it just connects at the back. So what we did was we did the blend zone and dropped it down to about there. Then we did the fade zone and dropped it down to there, and then the skin zone underneath. And then as we did the other tutorial on the other side, the lower fade, it was the same again. We brought the blend zone back to there, fade zone back to there, and then skin zone there and down, and then they connected. So the 3 zones came round, blend zone, fade zone and skin zone, and we brought them down. We don't want to be keeping them straight here, because what will happen is you'll compromise all that, which is the back of the head. We need to make sure we are protecting this hair at the back. Okay, so we just grab a comb. Just like we did the side profile, keeping that square, it's going to be the same at the back. We need to be creating a square profile coming off the shape of the head. So putting a comb against the back of the head, you can see then the shape that we need to follow with our blend zone. And we come away exactly where the comb comes away, because that's our recession zone, where it starts to round. Now we don't want to be following that blend zone straight all the way around, because what will happen then is we'll be cutting off the shape at the back and exposing the roundness of the head. We want to be dropping it down and protecting the shape of the head to maintain a nice square layered profile all the way around. And all I had to do was, with each zone, I came right round to the back and stopped, blend zone, round to the back, stop, fade zone, and then skin zone. I did the same on the opposite side and just connected those zones up. So in 2 steps, we've completed the whole haircut of a skin fade. But look at that shape. That's the shape we need to be following. All right, square. Let's get out of the way because my t-shirt's black. It's not showing it. Nice square profile at the back. And the hair looks a bit messy that side because we haven't blended it yet. That's going to be on the next tutorial. And a square profile on the side, giving that layered, shapely look throughout the haircut. So I hope that makes sense. That was the step-by-step beginner guide to skin fading. In the barber development section, it is a bit more advanced. I have got different fading methods. I've changed it up a little bit. There's not only one way to skin fade. There's loads of different ways to skin fade that suits a lot of different people. But the actual process, I don't know if process is the right word, but the end outcome and the general shape and layout is exactly the same, but maybe the methods and the process, would be slightly different. But the end goal is the same. You know, where the 2 guard goes is the same, whether you start with a 2 or you start with a 0. Where they go throughout the layout of the fade is in the same place. So I'm hoping this way gives you a good idea of where it's all meant to sit and exactly where it's meant to start, and to see then how you can connect them all step by step. So I hope that helped. We're going to be cutting the top next, using the 5 rows method. Thank you very much.